The Celestial Harbor Station buzzed with life like it did every evening. Dozens of alien species moved through the corridors, trading goods, sharing stories, and filling the air with languages that sounded like music, growls, and everything in between. The massive orbital platform floated in the darkness of space, a tiny island of light and warmth where creatures from 100 different worlds came together. Inside the nebula's rest, a small restaurant tucked away on the station's lower level, Rachel Morgan was having an ordinary shift. She moved between tables with practiced ease, balancing trays and dodging the occasional tail or tentacle that wandered into the aisle. Her brown hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and her uniform had a coffee stain on the sleeve from earlier that day. The restaurant wasn't fancy, but it was honest work, and Rachel had been doing it for 3 years now. She was wiping down a table near the window when the noise in the restaurant changed. Conversations didn't exactly stop, but they got quieter. Nervous, Rachel looked up and felt her breath catch in her throat. 3 Dracani had just walked through the door. Rachel had seen plenty of alien species during her time on the station. She'd served meals to beings with 6 arms, creatures that looked like walking crystals, and once, a sentient cloud of gas that communicated through color changes. But Dracani were different. Everyone knew about the Dracani. They looked like the dragons from old Earth stories, the kind her grandfather used to tell her about when she was little. But these weren't fantasy creatures. They were real, and they were terrifying in the most beautiful way possible. The mother stood at least 12 feet tall, her body covered in scales that shimmered and changed color as she moved. They went from deep purple to emerald green to silver, like oil floating on water when sunlight hits it just right. Her wings were folded against her back, but Rachel could see they were massive, probably stretching 20 feet when fully extended. Behind the mother came 2 smaller Dracani, her children. They were each about the size of a large dog, maybe a Great Dane, but their movements were more fluid, more graceful. One of them walked with confidence, head held high, golden eyes scanning the restaurant with curiosity. But the other one, the smaller of the 2, moved differently. It stayed close to its mother's legs, head down, and even from across the room Rachel could see it was trembling. Tom, the restaurant manager, practically ran to greet them. Rachel had never seen him move so fast. His hands shook slightly as he gestured toward the largest booth in the back corner, the one they usually reserved for groups. The mother Dracani nodded slowly, a gesture that seemed almost human, and began moving toward the booth. That's when Rachel heard it. The smaller hatchling made a sound that hit her like a physical force. It wasn't loud in the traditional sense, but it vibrated through everything. The floor hummed beneath her feet. The glasses on nearby tables rattled and clinked together. The windows buzzed faintly. It was a cry, a mournful wail that seemed to come from somewhere deep and ancient. The sound carried such raw sadness that Rachel felt her chest tighten. Around her, other customers reacted immediately. A group of merchants from the outer rim gathered their belongings and left quickly, leaving payment chips on their table. A family of Zentari, tall blue beings with 4 eyes, exchanged worried glances and moved to a table on the opposite side of the restaurant. Even the tough-looking mercenaries at the bar shifted uncomfortably on their stools. Tom appeared at Rachel's side, his face pale and slightly sweaty. He leaned close and whispered, "Table 7. They're yours." He tried to smile encouragingly, but it came out more like a grimace. "Good luck, Rachel. Just be polite. Very polite." Rachel grabbed her order pad and took a deep breath. Her heart was pounding, but something about that crying sound pulled at her. She'd heard sadness before, plenty of it. Her sister Jessica worked as a nurse in the pediatric unit back on Earth, and Rachel had visited enough times to recognize the sound of a child in real distress. This wasn't a tantrum. This wasn't anger or frustration. This was deeper. This was the sound of someone who had cried so much they'd almost given up hope that anyone would answer. She walked toward table 7 slowly, trying not to make any sudden movements. The mother Dracani was settling into the booth, which creaked under her weight despite being reinforced for larger species. Her golden eyes tracked Rachel's every step. They were ancient eyes, the kind that had seen centuries pass. But right now, those eyes held something very human, something Rachel recognized immediately. Exhaustion. The bone-deep, soul-crushing exhaustion that comes from days without sleep, from worry that won't let go, from trying everything and having nothing work. The confident hatchling sat on one side of the booth, already examining the menu display with interest. But the smaller one, the one making that heartbreaking sound, had pressed itself into the corner where the booth met the wall. Its scales, which should have been vibrant like its mother's, looked dull and dim. Its purple eyes were half closed, and its whole body shook with each sob. Rachel stopped a respectful distance from the table. The crying continued, wave after wave of subsonic sound that made her teeth ache and her eyes water. She watched the small creature huddle deeper into the corner, and something inside her chest cracked open. She'd seen this before. She'd seen children in hospital beds who'd been poked and prodded so many times they flinched at every touch. She'd seen kids who'd cried until their voices gave out, until they just made these soft, hopeless sounds because they didn't believe comfort was coming anymore. This little dragon, this child of an ancient and powerful species, was giving up. And nobody around them seemed to know what to do about it. Rachel looked at the mother's exhausted face, at the way her massive clawed hands rested on the table, at how her wings drooped slightly with fatigue. This wasn't a fierce warrior or a terrifying predator. This was a mother who was watching her child suffer and couldn't fix it. Rachel knew that look too. She'd seen it on her own mother's face when Rachel's little brother had been sick, really sick, and the doctors hadn't figured out what was wrong yet. The crying didn't stop. If anything, it got worse, more desperate. Other customers were leaving now, unable to handle the sound. But Rachel didn't move. She stood there watching the small hatchling and felt something shift inside her. She didn't know what she was going to do. She just knew she had to try something, anything, because that sound was breaking her heart, and she couldn't just walk away from a child in pain. No matter what species that child was. Rachel didn't think about what she was doing next. She just acted on instinct, the same instinct that made her sister Jessica reach out to scared kids in the hospital. She walked right up to the booth and knelt down beside it, getting herself down to the little hatchling's eye level. The larger hatchling immediately tensed up. Its head snapped toward Rachel, and a sharp hissing sound came from its throat. The sound was a clear warning, the kind that said, "Stay away from my family." Rachel's heart jumped into her throat, but she kept still. She didn't back away, didn't make any sudden moves. She just stayed there, kneeling, waiting. The mother Dracani made a sound, a quick clicking noise from deep in her throat. It was sharp and commanding. The larger hatchling immediately went quiet and settled back, though its golden eyes never left Rachel. It watched her with the intensity of a guard dog, ready to react if she did anything threatening. Rachel turned her attention back to the crying hatchling. "Hey there, little one," she said softly, keeping her voice low and gentle. She didn't reach out to touch it. She didn't move closer. She just spoke, letting her voice carry across the small distance between them. The crying didn't stop. The little creature kept making that heartbreaking sound, its body shaking with each sob. Its eyes were squeezed shut now, like it had given up on even looking at the world around it. Rachel felt her own eyes getting wet. She'd never been good at watching kids cry, whether they were human kids or apparently dragon kids either. Without even planning it, without thinking about whether it was appropriate or allowed or safe, Rachel started to hum. The melody came naturally, flowing out of her like water from a tap. It was an old song, one her grandmother used to sing to her when she was small and scared of the dark. Something about mockingbirds and diamond rings, though Rachel had never quite understood what mockingbirds had to do with anything. The tune was simple and sweet, the kind of melody that stuck in your head for days. She let the humming continue, finding the rhythm, letting it settle into something steady and calm. Her voice wasn't anything special. She'd never been in a choir or taken singing lessons. But she knew how to carry a tune, and more importantly, she knew how to put feeling into it. She hummed with all the gentleness she could manage, all the warmth and comfort she'd ever received from that song as a child. Something changed. The crying stuttered like a recording that had skipped. Then it stopped completely. Rachel kept humming, afraid that if she stopped, the crying would start again. Slowly, carefully, those enormous purple eyes opened. They turned toward her, focusing on her face. Up close, Rachel could see they weren't just purple. They had tiny flecks of gold scattered through them, like stars in a twilight sky. They were the most beautiful eyes she'd ever seen, and right now, they were staring at her with complete attention. Rachel transitioned from humming to actual words, her voice still soft and gentle. The restaurant had gone completely quiet around her, but she barely noticed. All her attention was on this small, sad creature in front of her. "Hush, little baby, don't say a word," she sang, the familiar lyrics coming back to her from childhood memories. "Mama's gonna buy you a mockingbird." Something incredible happened. The little hatchling's scales, which had been dull and dim before, started to shimmer. They pulsed with soft light, and the light moved in rhythm with Rachel's melody. It was like the creature's whole body was responding to the music, like the song was physically touching it in some way. Colors rippled across its scales, gentle waves of purple and silver and soft blue. Then Rachel heard another sound. This one didn't make the glasses rattle or the floor vibrate. This one was soft and warm and somehow musical. The hatchling was making a new noise, something that came from deep in its chest. It was a purr, a harmonic sound that somehow matched Rachel's voice perfectly. The two sounds wove together, human voice and dragon purr, creating something beautiful in the quiet restaurant. Rachel kept singing, moving through the verses. And if that mockingbird don't sing, Mama's gonna buy you a diamond ring. She'd always thought the lyrics were a bit silly, making all these promises about buying things. But right now the words didn't matter. It was the melody, the tone, the feeling behind it that counted. The mother Dracani leaned forward, her massive head tilting to one side. Her golden eyes were wide and something like wonder showed in them. She watched Rachel with an intensity that should have been frightening, but somehow wasn't. It was more like she was seeing something she'd never imagined possible, something that challenged everything she thought she knew about the universe. Rachel became aware that the entire restaurant had stopped functioning. Every single patron, whether they were seated or standing, had frozen in place. All eyes were on her. A human woman, barely 5'4", kneeling beside a booth and singing a children's lullaby to a dragon's child. The image must have looked absurd, impossible even. Humans were the newcomers to the galactic community, barely noticed most of the time. And here she was, doing something that apparently no one had ever done before. She finished the song, letting the last note fade away gently. And if that diamond ring turns brass, Mama's gonna buy you a looking glass. The final words hung in the air for a moment, and then there was just silence. Beautiful, peaceful silence. The little hatchling had curled up in the corner of the booth, but it looked different now. Its body was relaxed instead of tense. Its eyes were half closed, not squeezed shut in distress but drooping with sleepiness and contentment. The purring continued, a steady rhythmic sound that reminded Rachel of a cat curled up in a sunny window. Its scales glowed softly, pulsing gently like a slow heartbeat. The mother's voice broke the silence. It was a deep sound, rumbling like distant thunder before a storm, but there was something else in it. Confusion. Amazement. Maybe even a hint of desperation. "What is this?" she asked, her words heavily accented but clear. Rachel stood up slowly, being careful not to make any sudden movements. Her knees protested a bit from kneeling on the hard floor, but she ignored it. She looked up at the massive Dracani mother, meeting those ancient golden eyes, and gave a small, slightly embarrassed smile. "Just a song," she said simply, her voice still soft. "It's something we do on Earth. We sing to our children when they're sad or scared or can't sleep. It's just a song. Nothing special." But even as she said the words, Rachel knew they weren't quite true. Because looking at the peaceful hatchling, at the mother's expression of wonder, at all the stunned faces around the restaurant, she realized that maybe it was something special after all. Maybe something as simple as a lullaby could be extraordinary when shared across the vast distance between species. Maybe her voice, ordinary and human as it was, had just done something no advanced technology or ancient wisdom could do. Maybe she just changed everything. The mother Dracani straightened herself, her massive frame seeming to fill the entire corner of the restaurant. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that made Rachel understand this wasn't just any dragon. This was someone important, someone with authority and power. "I am Matriarch Velthara of the Fourth Brood," she said, each word pronounced carefully and deliberately. Her English was perfect, though heavily accented with sounds that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her chest. "I thank you for what you have done here. You have given my child something I could not." Rachel felt her mouth go dry. A matriarch. She'd read about them in the station's information database. Matriarchs were the leaders of Dracani family units, and each one commanded respect across multiple star systems. They were warriors, diplomats, and protectors all rolled into one. And one of them was thanking her. Rachel Morgan, waitress from Chicago, was being thanked by someone who probably had more power than Earth's entire government. You're welcome," Rachel managed to say, her voice coming out smaller than she'd intended. "I'm just glad I could help." Velthara's golden eyes studied her for a long moment, and Rachel had the uncomfortable feeling of being examined down to her very soul. Then the matriarch gestured with one clawed hand toward the peacefully purring hatchling. "My youngest is named Cress. For 4 days he has not stopped crying. 4 days without rest, without peace, without hope. 4 days." Rachel tried to imagine it. 4 days of that heartbreaking sound, that desperate sobbing. 4 days of watching your child suffer and not being able to fix it. No wonder Velthara looked so exhausted. The matriarch continued, her voice growing heavier with each word. "Cress cannot process telepathic comfort. This is how Dracani soothe our young ones. We share thoughts, emotions, feelings of safety and love directly through our minds. But Cress." She paused, looking at her sleeping child with an expression that was unmistakably grief. His mind does not work this way. He cannot receive our comfort. To him, he is alone, always alone, no matter how close we stay to him. Rachel's heart ached. She thought about how terrible it must be to be unable to feel your family's love even when they were right there beside you. To be trapped in your own sadness with no way out. That's awful, she whispered. We have traveled to 17 worlds, Velthara said, and now there was something like desperation creeping into her voice. I have consulted with healers from a dozen different species. Telepaths, empaths, medical experts, even spiritual guides. We have tried medicines, crystals, energy treatments, everything anyone could suggest. Nothing has worked. Nothing has even helped for more than a few minutes. The matriarch's wings shifted slightly, a gesture that Rachel sensed meant deep distress. I was considering. Velthara's voice trailed off and she looked away from Rachel, staring at something in the distance that only she could see. The silence stretched out for several heartbeats. When she spoke again, the words came out barely above a whisper. A mercy ending. Rachel felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. The words took a moment to process, and when they did, she felt sick. You mean, you were going to end his suffering? Velthara finished, her voice flat and hollow. It is not done lightly in our culture. It is the hardest decision a parent can make. But to watch him waste away, unable to feel comfort, unable to bond with his family, crying every moment he is awake. I thought perhaps death would be kinder than that life. But the song worked, Rachel said quickly, urgently. She gestured toward Cress, who was still curled up peacefully, still purring that soft, contented sound. Look at him. He's calm. He's happy. Yes. Velthara's eyes came back to Rachel, and now there was something new in them. Something that looked like hope, but mixed with fear, like she was afraid to believe what she was seeing. Your species uses auditory comfort. Sound. Voice. Music. We never considered this possibility. Dracani relies so heavily on telepathy that we forgot there are other ways to reach a troubled mind. She fell silent for a long moment, her gaze moving between Rachel and the sleeping Cress. Rachel could see her thinking, weighing options, making calculations. When Velthara spoke again, her voice was formal, almost ceremonial. I wish to hire you as Cress's caretaker. The words hit Rachel like a physical blow. What? I don't understand. You have a gift my son needs, Velthara explained. You can give him comfort in a way his own family cannot. I'm offering you a position in my household. You would care for Cress, sing to him, provide him with the auditory comfort he requires. Rachel's mind was spinning. I'm just a waitress, she protested, hearing how weak her own voice sounded. I don't know anything about taking care of dragon children. I don't have any special training. I just sang him a lullaby my grandmother taught me. Velthara leaned forward, and despite her massive size and fearsome appearance, there was something almost gentle in her expression. You are a human who knows how to soothe a child in pain. That is more valuable than any weapon in the galaxy. It is more valuable than any technology, any telepathic power, any ancient knowledge. You gave my son peace when nothing else could. That makes you exactly what we need. The matriarch reached into a pouch at her side and pulled out a small crystal. It was about the size of Rachel's thumb, and it glowed with a soft blue light that pulsed gently. Velthara placed it on the table between them with surprising delicacy for someone with such large claws. This is a communication crystal, she explained. It is attuned to my personal frequency. If you press your thumb to it and speak, I will hear you no matter where in the galaxy I am. Take time to consider my offer. This is not a decision to make lightly. Velthara stood, her full height making the ceiling seem suddenly low. The position comes with housing aboard my family vessel. You would have your own quarters, access to any resources you need. You would be granted status under Dracani law, which means protection and respect throughout our territories. And you would be considered family. Not a servant. Family. Rachel stared at the crystal, her thoughts a jumbled mess. This was insane. This was impossible. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. Yesterday she'd been worried about whether she'd have enough money to visit her sister for the holidays. Today she was being offered a position with an alien family, a chance to be part of something she couldn't even fully comprehend. Velthara gently lifted Cress from the booth. The little hatchling stirred slightly but didn't wake, just nestled closer to his mother's chest, still purring softly. The larger hatchling hopped down and moved to his mother's side, though he kept glancing back at Rachel with what might have been curiosity. Think about it, Velthara said. But do not take too long. Cress will wake eventually, and when he does, he will need you again." Then they were gone, moving through the restaurant toward the exit. The other patrons parted like water, giving the matriarch and her children a wide berth. Rachel watched them go, her legs feeling suddenly weak. She sank into the nearest chair, her eyes still fixed on the glowing crystal sitting on the table. Tom appeared beside her, his face pale and his eyes wide. He looked like he'd just witnessed something his brain couldn't quite process. "What just happened?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Rachel, what the hell just happened?" Rachel reached out and picked up the crystal. It was warm in her palm, and she could feel a faint vibration coming from it, like it was alive somehow. She looked up at Tom, then around at all the other stunned faces in the restaurant. Everyone was staring at her, waiting for an explanation. "I think," Rachel said slowly, the words feeling surreal even as she spoke them, "I think I just got offered a job by a dragon." 3 days later, Rachel stood in the landing bay of Celestial Harbor Station, her small travel bag clutched in her hands. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The bay was massive, designed to accommodate ships of all sizes, and right now it felt way too big and too empty. Overhead, the atmospheric shields shimmered blue, the only thing standing between her and the vacuum of space. She'd spent those 3 days doing research. The station's database had information about Draconi culture, and Rachel had read every word she could find. She'd learned that caretakers were considered sacred in their society, that they were protectors of the next generation and held in the highest regard. She'd also learned something that made her stomach flip with nervousness. No outsider had ever held such a position. Ever. In thousands of years of Draconi history, caretakers had always been Draconi themselves or occasionally members of telepathic species who could bond mentally with the children. Never a human. Never someone from a species that most of the galaxy still considered newcomers and primitives. Rachel had also called home. The communication delay to Earth was about 20 minutes each way, but she'd needed to hear her mother's voice. She told her mom everything: the crying hatchling, the song, the job offer, the impossible decision she was facing. Her mother, Karen Morgan, had listened to the entire recorded message without interrupting. When her response came back, her mom's face on the video screen had been thoughtful and calm. "Baby," her mom had said, "some people spend their whole lives looking for purpose. They search and never quite find that thing that makes them feel like they're exactly where they're supposed to be. Sounds like your purpose just found you instead. You've always had a gift with kids, ever since you were little yourself. Maybe it doesn't matter if those kids have scales and wings. Maybe what matters is that you can help someone who needs you." Those words had stayed with Rachel. They carried her through her resignation from the restaurant. Tom had hugged her and told her she was either incredibly brave or completely crazy, possibly both. They'd carried her through packing up her small apartment. And now they carried her as she stood in this landing bay, waiting for a ship that would take her away from everything she'd ever known. The Draconi vessel came through the atmospheric shield like a knife cutting through silk. It was beautiful in a way Rachel hadn't expected. Not sleek and metallic like human ships, but organic-looking, all curves and flowing lines, with scales built into its hull that shimmered just like Velthara's own scales. It settled onto the landing pad with barely a sound, and a ramp extended from its side. Velthara appeared at the top of the ramp, and behind her Rachel could see both hatchlings. Cress spotted her first and made a happy chirping sound that echoed through the bay. Rachel felt her nervousness ease a little. She could do this. She would do this. The weeks that followed changed everything about Rachel's life. Her quarters on the family vessel were bigger than her entire apartment had been on the station. She had a bedroom with an actual window that looked out into space, a living area, even a small kitchen that the ship's systems had modified to accommodate human food preparation. But Rachel barely spent any time there because most of her days were spent with Cress. She sang to him for hours. Every song she could remember from her childhood, every lullaby her grandmother had taught her, every folk song she'd learned in school. She sang country ballads her dad used to play on road trips. She sang pop hits from when she was a teenager, the ones she and her friends had screamed along to at concerts. She even sang TV theme songs and advertising jingles when she ran out of real songs. Cress absorbed it all like a sponge soaking up water. The transformation in him was nothing short of miraculous. The withdrawn, constantly crying hatchling disappeared completely. In his place was a curious, playful young dragon who wanted to explore everything and asked questions about everything. His purple and gold eyes grew brighter each day, sparkling with intelligence and joy. And the purring, that beautiful harmonic purring, became almost constant. He purred when Rachel sang, purred when she talked to him, even purred in his sleep. But the real surprise came from Velthara's older hatchling, whose name Rachel learned was Thorn. At first, Thorn had been hostile or at least wary. He'd kept his distance, watching Rachel with suspicious eyes, clearly not trusting this strange human who'd suddenly become part of their family. But curiosity eventually won out over caution. Rachel first noticed Thorn lingering near doorways during her singing sessions with Cress. He'd pretend to be doing something else, examining a panel on the wall or grooming his claws, but his attention was clearly on the music. Then he started coming closer, sitting just outside the room where Rachel and Cress were. Finally, about 2 weeks in, he came all the way inside and settled down near his brother. One evening, after Rachel had finished singing a gentle lullaby and Cress had dozed off, Thorn stayed behind. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, a gesture Rachel had learned meant he was nervous. Finally he spoke, his voice surprisingly soft for someone who'd seemed so aggressive before. "Do you know any louder songs?" he asked, not quite meeting her eyes. Rachel had to stop herself from laughing with pure delight. "Louder songs? You mean like rock music?" Thorn's head tilted in that questioning way both hatchlings had. "What is rock music?" Rachel grinned. She pulled out her personal data pad, the one that held her music collection from Earth. "Let me introduce you to something special." She started with the classics, Led Zeppelin, Queen, AC/DC, then moved into more modern stuff. When she played Sweet Child O' Mine, and that iconic guitar solo kicked in, the expression on Thorn's face was something Rachel knew she'd remember for the rest of her life. His eyes went wide, his scales rippled with colors she'd never seen before, bright reds and oranges and electric blues. He started moving, swaying to the rhythm, and then he spread his wings and actually danced, his movements wild and joyful and completely unself-conscious. After that, Thorn requested song time, just as much as Cress did. The two brothers had different tastes. Cress loved soft, melodic songs while Thorn preferred anything with a strong beat and electric guitars. But they both loved music. They both needed it in their own ways. The biggest surprise of all was Velthara herself. The matriarch, this ancient and powerful being who commanded fleets and made decisions that affected entire planets, started requesting evening performances. She'd settle her massive form in Rachel's common room after the hatchlings had gone to sleep, her wings relaxed and spread slightly, her eyes half closed in contentment. Rachel would sing softer songs then, older ones, melodies that felt like they came from deep in Earth's history. One night, after Rachel had finished a particularly old folk song about sailors and the sea, Velthara spoke quietly. "Your species is strange," she said, her deep voice thoughtful. "So fragile. So short-lived. You have no telepathy, no natural armor, no great physical strength. By all logical measures, you should be insignificant in the galactic community." Rachel felt a little defensive but stayed quiet, waiting to hear where this was going. "And yet," Velthara continued, "you possess something we ancient ones lost somewhere in our evolution. The ability to express comfort, love, and emotion through sound alone. You make feelings tangible in a way that bypasses all mental barriers. You make emotions into something that can be shared with anyone, regardless of their species or their mental capabilities." She opened her eyes fully and looked at Rachel. "You make art out of caring for others. That is not insignificant. That is extraordinary." 6 months had passed, and Rachel Morgan found herself standing in a chamber so massive it made Celestial Harbor's largest hangar look like a closet. The walls stretched up so high she couldn't see the ceiling, and they were made of some kind of dark crystal that seemed to absorb and reflect light at the same time. The floor beneath her feet was polished stone that showed her reflection like a mirror. 12 matriarchs formed a semicircle around her. 12 of the most powerful beings in this part of the galaxy, each one ancient beyond Rachel's ability to comprehend, each one capable of leveling cities if they chose. Their scales ranged from deep emerald to burnished gold to silver gray, and their wings, even folded, created an almost wall-like presence behind them. The combined weight of their attention made Rachel feel like gravity had suddenly increased. But she wasn't alone. Cress stood beside her, and the hatchling had grown. He was now twice the size he'd been when they first met, reaching up to Rachel's shoulder when he stood on all fours. His scales gleamed with vibrant health, shimmering with purples and golds and occasional flashes of blue. His eyes were bright and confident, and he stood with his head held high. He was no longer the broken, crying child she'd met in that restaurant. He was becoming who he was always meant to be. Velthara stood among the council but slightly apart from them, positioning herself as both member and advocate. When she spoke, her voice carried through the enormous chamber without echo, each word clear and precise. "Honored matriarchs of the council," she began formally, I present to you Rachel Morgan, human of Earth, who saved my youngest child's life with nothing but her voice. Cress, whom we had deemed defective and incompatible with our ways, now thrives beyond all expectations. This human showed us something we had forgotten, that our way is not the only way. That sometimes the greatest strength lies not in uniformity but in difference. That sometimes the answer comes not from those like us, but from those who are nothing like us at all. The eldest matriarch leaned forward. Her scales were a dull gray, the color of ancient stone, and patches of them looked rough with age. But her eyes were sharp and calculating, holding the wisdom and wariness of someone who had lived for thousands of years. When she spoke, her voice was like grinding glaciers, slow and inexorable. You are soft, she said, stating it as simple fact. Wait. Your bones break easily. Your skin tears. You live for barely a century if you are lucky. You have no telepathy, no natural weapons, no armor. By every measure we use to evaluate species, you should be irrelevant. She paused, her massive head tilting slightly. Why should we value your kind? Rachel felt her mouth go dry. Every instinct screamed at her to be diplomatic, careful, to say what they wanted to hear. But something about the way Cress pressed against her leg gave her courage. She thought about the past 6 months, about all the songs she'd sung, about watching 2 young dragons discover joy through music. She thought about Velthara's words about making emotions tangible. And she decided to tell the truth. Because we know how to care, Rachel said, her voice steadier than she expected. You're right about us. We are soft. We are weak. We die quickly by your standards. We don't have telepathy or natural armor or ancient wisdom passed down through millennia. She took a breath. But we have something you don't. We've spent our entire existence as a species learning how to comfort each other across every barrier imaginable. We have thousands of languages, hundreds of cultures, and we've been separated by oceans and mountains and deserts throughout our history. So we learned to connect anyway. She gestured to Cress beside her. We use music. We use touch. We use physical presence and the sound of our voices. We've made an art form out of empathy, out of understanding what someone else is feeling even when we can't read their mind. We've had to because we couldn't just share thoughts telepathically. We had to learn to read faces and body language and tone of voice. We had to learn to say, I love you, and you're safe, and I'm here, in ways that could be heard and felt and understood. Cress chirped, a soft sound of agreement, and pressed more firmly against Rachel's leg. His tail wrapped partially around her ankle, a gesture of comfort and solidarity. The simple action spoke louder than any words could. Here was a child who had been deemed impossible to reach, now bonded completely to a human who had reached him through nothing but songs and patience and care. Rachel continued, feeling momentum building. You've built an empire through strength. You've conquered worlds and survived for eons because you're powerful and ancient and nearly impossible to defeat. That's incredible. That's worthy of respect. But there's another kind of strength. The strength to sit with someone who's hurting and just be present. The strength to keep singing even when you don't know if it's working. The strength to open your heart to someone completely different from you and say, your pain matters to me. The chamber fell silent. The 12 matriarchs looked at each other, and Rachel could tell they were communicating telepathically, having a conversation she couldn't hear. She waited, her heart pounding, one hand resting on Cress's shoulder. The young dragon's scales were warm under her palm, and she could feel the gentle vibration of his purring. Finally, the eldest matriarch spoke again. The council has conferred. We see the evidence before us. A hatchling we had written off as lost now stands healthy and whole, bonded to a creature from a species we barely noticed before. This is not a small thing. This is not insignificant. She straightened, her ancient body still powerful despite her age. We propose a formal alliance between the Draconi sovereignty and the human peoples of Earth. But not an alliance of weapons or trade or military cooperation. Something different. Humans will serve as cultural ambassadors, healers, and caretakers throughout our territories. You will teach us what you know, how to reach those who cannot be reached through telepathy alone, how to express emotions through sound and presence, how to care across differences. Another matriarch, younger but still ancient by human standards, added, we have conquered through strength for millennia. Perhaps it is time we learned a different way. Conquest through compassion. Victory through understanding rather than domination. Rachel felt tears prickling at her eyes. This was bigger than she'd ever imagined. This wasn't just about her and Cress anymore. This was about humanity finding its place in the galaxy, not as warriors or merchants or scientists, but as caregivers and healers and bridge builders. 3 months later, Rachel stood in a recruitment center in downtown Chicago. The room was packed with over 200 people, all of them volunteers who'd heard about the Draconi Alliance and wanted to be part of it. They were teachers and nurses and musicians and therapists. They were young and old, from every background imaginable. They were humans ready to take their gift for caring and share it with the stars. Rachel stood at the front of the room, and beside her stood Cress. The young dragon had insisted on coming to Earth with her, refusing to be separated from his caretaker. His scales drew gasps from the crowd. Most of these people had never seen a Draconi in person before. "Listen carefully," Rachel said, her voice carrying through the room. "The Draconi don't need us to fight for them. They have plenty of warriors. They don't need our technology, theirs is already more advanced than ours in most ways. They don't need our resources or our strategic position or any of the things that usually make alliances valuable." She paused, making eye contact with as many people as she could. "What they need is what we do best. They need us to teach them how to care for each other across every difference. How to comfort someone who's suffering. How to sing someone through their darkest moment. How to build family not through blood or telepathy, but through choice and patience and love. How to make strangers into something more." Cress spread his wings. They'd grown large enough now that he had to be careful not to knock things over when he extended them fully. He opened his mouth and began to sing, a harmonic sound that filled the room with warmth and beauty. Rachel joined in, her human voice blending with his dragon song, two completely different sounds weaving together into something new and beautiful. The crowd watched in stunned silence as human and dragon created music together. When the song ended, Rachel spoke one more time. "The galaxy is learning something new. Humanity's greatest weapon isn't violence or technology or even intelligence. Our greatest weapon is something simple. Something revolutionary. Something as old as the first parent who sang to comfort their crying child." She smiled, resting her hand on Cress's shoulder. "Our weapon is love. And now it's time to share it with the stars."